Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the media and the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago by extension. I address you today, of course, in my capacity as Minister of National Security and long-standing member of the National Security Council. And I have with me today the very hard-working and focused Commissioner of Police, Mr. MacDonald Jacob. There's no doubt that every country in the world finds it necessary to protect its citizens as individuals, as families, as organizations, and of course to protect the state as a whole in the realm of terrorism and terrorist financing and violent extremism and such like. In an attempt to protect its citizens and itself as a state, there are many countries of the world, perhaps most, all, who would have to possess necessary armaments and tools in order to do that. It has become necessary in this modern world to monitor persons who are engaged in criminal and terrorist activity, and societies, law enforcement around the world have found it necessary to equip themselves adequately in order to do that. In this democracy, we do so on the basis of the law and the Constitution. Hence the reason why we passed the Interception of Communications Act with its appropriate amendments from 2020, and it is to allow the state to conduct the monitoring of persons who will hurt you, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, in any way they opportunistically can, and certainly to protect the state from the kinds of attacks that are not unknown to human experience. I am, quite admittedly, affronted, perhaps even embarrassed, at having to discuss some of these matters, because I know of no other country where this kind of discussion takes place in the way in which the leader of the opposition created it to take place in Trinidad and Tobago, not once, as she did recently, but twice. She did it before in 2010, as soon as she became Prime Minister. I know of no other country in the world, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, where this kind of scandal, this kind of noise around important issues such as the protection and the security of our citizens and the state as a whole is bandied about in public. There are countries in the region that have the capacity that we speak of. But Trinidad and Tobago is particularly noisy and unique, led by the leader of the opposition on 2 occasions. It's very unfortunate. And it is that unfortunate, reckless, senseless, churlish behavior that led the Honorable Prime Minister, reluctant as he was, as chairman of the National Security Council, to go to the Parliament last Friday and to address you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and the world, because others are looking and listening on this matter. In fact, the Prime Minister, in his statement, actually said, and I quote, "This statement concerns matters of national security, which must be always handled carefully and responsibly," cognizant of that, as indeed I am this afternoon. But it has become necessary for him to do it because of the very disturbing false narrative and concerted and conscious effort to mislead not only the population, but the international community who would pay attention to what we are talking about. And this is led, as he pointed out, by the leader of the opposition and by those who should be more responsible and who definitely ought to know better. There are others who are contributing to this scandal and this noise who ought to know better. Jumping in the middle, getting involved. The Prime Minister's statement focused on as a response to the leader of the opposition in recognition of her attempts with disturbing false narratives to mislead the population and those who would look from outside. But other voices and noises just jump in the middle, trying to make themselves relevant and to be heard in the middle of this very serious thing. So it is particularly troubling to me. The Prime Minister, while I'm at it, made it abundantly clear that the leader of the opposition's suggestion that the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and while she attacks the government, she must know that no politician gets close to any such activity. It is the Commissioner of Police. It is the Chief of Defense Staff. It is the Director of the SSA, the Strategic Services Agency. Under the law, the Interception of Communications Act, they are the only three stakeholders who have the authority to be involved, to authorize any such legal activity. And that activity required its passage in the Parliament, and it was passed with the support of the leader of the opposition and her minions. It required as well special majorities, which we got with their support in the interest of the state. It requires the intervention of the judiciary to give life to it. It's not just what the commissioner or the chief of defense staff or what the SSA want. They have to document processes and justification. And these authorities are given for a specific time. And if they need more time, they have to go back in a judicial process in order to get it. A whole lot of safeguards, and the leader of the opposition, as the Prime Minister correctly pointed out, ought to know that. But then she has demonstrated ignorance and recklessness so often. I and all wonder if she in fact knows. But she claimed that we had this Pegasus spyware solution. Using the word spy implies that it is something illicit, improper, untoward, illegal. And then went on to identify that this spying takes place against journalists, magistrates, elements of the judiciary, and political opponents. And from the time she said that, I said to myself, as someone who would be aware of all of this, by virtue of my being a parliamentarian, by virtue of my being the Minister of National Security, and of course by virtue of my being a former chairman of the National Security Joint Select Committee of the Parliament, and certainly as a member of the National Security Council, I said to myself when I heard, and I find some support in a Guardian editorial of yesterday or today, I'm not sure which one, but the Guardian editorial I found support from, because I said from the time she recklessly did it, that she should be called upon by you, the media, on behalf of the people of this country, to produce immediately, before you reported a line, to produce immediately the best evidence of this spying of which she spoke. Because I know monitoring takes place in the constitutional terms and the judicial process that I have just explained, and for good reason. But when you talk about spying on magistrates and judges and so on, as the Prime Minister asks, what reason would any government have to be doing that? And therefore, you, the media, should have asked her. Well, I see finally yesterday's editorial call on her to put aside all the old talk, forgive my coarse language, all the rum talk, and to bring the best evidence you have. I support the fact she has none. None. But recklessness abounds. And let me tell you what that recklessness means. Let me tell you what this recklessness means. And I have a report here from an expert in these matters. I have a report here from an expert in these matters, which commenting, reviewing our condition since her first reckless outburst in 2010, says, among other things, the country was left vulnerable to serious and organized criminals for a significant period as its intelligence gathering capabilities, to quote the expert, went dark by virtue of her going in that airport shortly after she became Prime Minister, and to tell the country that there was spying and all of that. And we would find out later she was in possession of a letter written by a then police officer who identified certain people in the SSA at the time, in the Special Anti-Crime Unit, who was supposedly hostile to the opposition. All them kind of recklessness went on in this place. Fired all of them, replaced them with a rookie and others. So the expert is identifying that it left us in the lurch. The country had to compensate several individuals who were falsely accused of spying on public officials in the media. The state had to pay tremendous costs to defense attorneys of these former intelligence professionals. The dismantling of the intelligence apparatus of the country also adversely affected our international reputation and partnerships with services of other nations. And let me tell you this, I'm very conscious, ladies and gentlemen, that this very discussion we are having here on this very topic brings us into disrepute internationally. Those who share intelligence with us, as internationally we must, to fight terrorism and violent extremism and internationally organized crime. They lose respect for us. They want to know what the hell is going on in Trinidad and Tobago with all here. And that is what this recklessness on the part of, led by the leader of the opposition, a former prime minister and chairman of the National Security Council, she does it all the time. It went on to say, as an agency, it was left with a leadership crisis, ad hoc and unqualified management, and an adoption of an organizational culture which almost crippled this nation's ability to produce world-class intelligence. The agency lost highly qualified and trained staff due to termination of contracts, which we had to pay for because it turned out that they were falsely and wrongly dismissed. And finally it says in this little stanza, today the state and that organization and its staff are still recovering from the damage caused by such unsubstantiated allegations, unquote. And before those wounds healed, Kamla Persad-Bissessar is at it again. And as such, the Prime Minister found it necessary to come to the Parliament. Among the other things he made clear is that we do not have Pegasus, which she identified, in this country. So she was wrong, reckless, and just simply wrong. In the middle of all this noise, a very screeching voice jumps in to identify, okay, it's true. We don't have Pegasus. The Prime Minister is right. And of course, another issue emerged around that, and that is the purchase of some other intelligence gathering equipment, which is now clearly identified as not having the same capacity as Pegasus, because Pegasus was recommended to this country since 2019, and it was not accepted or accessed simply because its capability went beyond the legal authorization as we got and earned in the parliament with a special majority. It was rejected. So other equipment was purchased with less capacity but meeting the criteria that we had. And the Prime Minister, among other things, said that was done without the authorization of the National Security Council. I told you a while ago, I have been a long-standing member of that council. I was not Minister of National Security at the time, but I was a member of the council. And I am in a position to say that the Prime Minister's comment on that is absolutely truthful and correct. And I'm also able to say that those bits of equipment could not work on their own. They required some backbone, if you like, servers, which was not in the possession of the police. So while they had that equipment, it could not have been used. And I am now in a position to say truthfully to you, members of the media in Trinidad and Tobago, those who had control of the servers, that is to say the SSA, which according to the Prime Minister's truthful comment, our policy is and has always been that all that kind of equipment and monitoring must be done only by the SSA. So I'm now in a position to tell you, he was also correct on that. Clear statement of the government's policy. And also, I have knowledge that it has never been used by the police, because had it been used, we would have been able to monitor, to audit that elsewhere. Mr. Jacob will speak to that a little later. So I came today to let you know that, in my view, and based on the knowledge that we share, the Prime Minister's comments were absolutely correct. But the police service has been called into question, and the SSA, because while the opposition leader speaks of the government, she knows that I never even see the equipment. I don't know nothing about that. I know about the policy, I know about the provision of resources, and I know when authority of the National Security Council is necessary and when it was not had to purchase a certain kind of equipment. And I would just want to remind you, shortly or very recently, you would have known, members of the media, that this government, the cabinet, authorized the Minister of Finance to send the central audit team of the Ministry of Finance into the police financial operations. That was completed sometime recently. A report was issued by the central audit team, and those who have responsibility for studying that report and treating with its purport are now doing so. And the chips will fall where they may. Because if any permanent secretary or any accounting officer, which the Commissioner of Police is, expend or intends to expend or authorize the expending of monies more than $1 million, there are certain processes that must be undergone. And where that was not done, that will get its attention in due time. But that is noise apart. I'm dealing today with the leader of the opposition. My understanding as Minister of National Security, and the Commissioner of Police is here, he will be able to speak to the implications of all this for the police service, because it is really the police service and the SSA that has come under attack. And I would now give way to Mr. Jacob in that regard.
Good afternoon to all viewers. Thank you very much, Minister of National Security. I'm here this evening to speak on behalf of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. And I want to make it clear and reinforce the point that was made in Parliament and otherwise, that the police service never had in its possession any spy software such as Pegasus. Never. I know as a fact that at some time the former Commissioner of Police had in fact purchased software that does not reach to the level of the Pegasus. That software was in two parts. One, for a period of time, a certain aspects of it was in fact in the possession of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and the other half was in possession of the SSA. Without both merging and coming together, nothing could not happen. Therefore, also within there, a lot of training needed to take place in order that it could have been utilized. On the 10th of September last year, the other, what we call the bark pack, that is linked with the server, was in fact handed over to the SSA. So what was in the possession of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service was handed over to the SSA. Therefore, the police service right now, we don't have possession of, even though that artificial spy software has been spoken about in our possession. I got the assurance from the director of SSA with his technical persons in exactly how the software work, and if there were any sort of interaction or what we call hits, to say that someone had used it, it would have been able to be identified. So during the period up to the 10th of September, when the police had the backpack in their possession, there were no indicators of anything hitting on the server. And it is obvious. I mentioned that training had to take place in order for this software to be utilized. Therefore, the question of the police utilizing software to spy on anybody could not have taken place, because we are talking about, even we are talking about in 2022, I think it was referred to. And if this was handed over since September, therefore the police service in itself had no possession of such software. The director of SSA, we constantly in conversations, and this is to actually utilize mainly to deal with the criminal elements in the country, right, and to deal with transnational crime, terrorism, and the head of SSA, together with the Commissioner of Police and the Chief of Defense Staff, we are the persons who will meet and discuss how and who we will link to utilize this particular software. We had no such meeting or conversations as yet in relation to it, because I know as a fact that training needs to be commenced in order that it can be utilized. So basically that is it from us, the police. We want to say in certain terms that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service don't have any sort of spy software in its possession. Thank you very much.
And ladies and gentlemen, let me say as well, thank you very much, Commissioner. Let me say as well, in closing, that any use of any equipment by any individual, including members of law enforcement, to intercept conversations is in direct contravention of the said Interception of Communications Act with very severe consequences. If an officer, and all the officers of the SSA and in sensitive sections in the police service are vetted, if one of them utilized that system in an unauthorized, not judicially supported manner, serious sanctions can come to bear, including as a result of breaches of the serious criminal law. So what the leader of the opposition is really saying is that there are people who are breaching these laws, and then identifies magistrates and judges and our political opponents. As I said in another place recently, when the police, as far as I know, investigating crime of any nature or description, they don't see yellow or red crime, they see crime. And if the criminal happens to be a politician, that has happened in this world already, politicians have gone to jail. Politicians in Trinidad have gone to jail. It's just coincidental. So I can't understand why the lady is trying to conduct these matters in the court of public opinion. We say we have a clear policy on these matters. It is the SSA. They are very clear. They must operate within the confines of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. And as far as I'm aware, that has been happening. And therefore the comments by the leader of the opposition, as has been made clear by the Honorable Prime Minister in his impeccably laid out statement last Friday in the Parliament, and quite correctly so, those comments by her are to be flatly rejected. You have heard the police commissioner today, who can speak from a position of knowledge. And I conclude by asking, as the Guardian editorial asked, for the leader of the opposition to bring her best evidence of that kind of behavior. Otherwise, she should be condemned by all of us as being reckless and dangerous to the well-being of Trinidad and Tobago for those kinds of comments. I thank you. And I'm willing to take any questions that you may have, members of the media, in these regards. It appears as though you are quite clear on the terms of our communication. Any questions? I can barely hear you. Yes, I'm available to you. Any questions you may have? Thank you.
For bringing us up to speed in this press conference. I want to ask in relation to the incident on Friday, Minister, where a police officer was shot and killed. We've gotten reports that the prime suspect involved is willing to surrender himself, right? However, he is a bit fearful, right? But dialing back, what is your initial reaction to that incident, and what is your position on his willingness to surrender, and will that be facilitated? Is that something that can be facilitated?
As Minister of National Security, with the responsibility for the oversight and the policy directions and resourcing of the police service, as a citizen of this republic, as a former police officer who have seen during the course of my service other officers lose their lives, I was very disturbed and traumatized by it. And I took the opportunity, the first opportunity I had, and I do so again, to extend deep and sincere condolences to the family of Constable Jelks, and of course to the police service led by Mr. Jacob, because it is very traumatizing indeed. This young man would have put on his boots and his uniform, joined others to go into the community to protect us, and he would have lost his life. It's a very sad day, sad set of circumstances. But of course the matter is under investigation. I'm aware on briefings from the police commissioner, who will be able to speak more to this before you, that the police engaged in a massive manhunt for suspects around this issue. And of course, those, based on the briefing I had this morning, those operations are still ongoing. I did myself hear of what you just raised, Mr. Ramdeo, that some person wants to hand himself over to the police. For me, that's a good thing, because if the police have an interest in you and you hand yourself over, that makes the police job a little easier. But the Commissioner of Police is here, and he'll be able to say a lot more about the details around that, Mr. Jacob.
Yeah, thank you very much, Minister. On the night in question, when I was at Rich Plain, that said question was asked, and I indicated that the police service is quite willing to organize, and I mentioned that the persons with the attorney can call stations, the homicide department, you know, and then I noticed that it raised its head again, saying whether or not the police is willing, you know. You know, sometimes we have selective listening taking place, because I indicated that. But what is happening, because at times persons might be unwilling to go to a station, we have provided numbers, and I will give the numbers now. 483 1170 to 1174. These numbers will be answered by selected senior officers from the homicide department, and they will organize with the person or the lawyers the manner in which the person can give up himself. This has been done on several occasions within recent past, within Trinidad and Tobago. Most of the lawyers who are criminal lawyers also have the numbers for all the various regions of the homicide department, and they utilize it on a regular basis. So again, it's amazing to me that the question is being asked, what can be done? We had a recent experience just a few days ago where an attorney utilized these said numbers, contacted the homicide, and said, yes, we are bringing in the person by X time. The police abandoned their tactical searches for the individual depending on the attorney. He then called after and said, well, no, we'll bring him in the morning. However, up to this time, that person was never brought in. But we have other information that what took place, and we have to be very, very careful with it. Therefore, even though they are making the request and saying that they wish for him to turn himself, our operations will continue with our leads and our search to arrest the persons who are responsible. And we will not let those sort of noise interfere with us from the recent experience that we had with a suspect that's supposed to be brought in, and the police abandoned their tactical move to arrest that person. We are asking persons, be very careful and be minded of when the police are doing an investigation. Right here, under the Criminal Law Act, you have something called assisting offenders. And if you are sure that a person is involved or suspected to be involved in a criminal matter, and the police is searching for that person, and you do anything untoward to prevent or assist that person from being arrested, you can also be charged. No one is above the law. So we are suggesting that we have the facility, utilize the facility, and all the persons, the lawyers who are involved in criminal litigation is quite aware. In recent times, we found that persons believe that by throwing up various aspects of investigation and their defenses within the social media can assist them when the time comes whether or not person can be charged. We got to also be very, very careful with that, and it's a bad precedence that is being set. We again wish to advise persons that the social media is not an extension of the criminal justice system. And in some instances, when you throw up what you suggest is the person's defense in the social media, you might even make matters worse for them. It is something that we should desist from doing, and I believe most attorneys are well trained and they understand exactly what I am saying. But to get the sympathy of the population will not interfere with the police and the investigation, right? And even pre-action protocol letters coming to the police will not deter us or frighten us in any way to prevent us from doing our investigation. And that have been a new trend that have been developed over a period of time when we are conducting criminal investigation. As you know, we are well experienced and are professionals. And as I tell the persons, when they send the pre-action protocol letters, they will not see me trembling, or my officers, because we are quite aware of the law and what is required. Right? We want to change the face in how criminal investigation and criminal law should be done on this land, but it will not benefit the country. There's a social contract existing between the people and the state, where the police are given a certain amount of powers, right, in order to conduct their affairs. And they need to conduct it within particular parameters. We know what are those parameters, and if at any time police officers cross the line, you're all aware that our Professional Standards Bureau or Complaints Division will in fact do what is required to be done in investigation. So again, I wish to make this plea that if persons who are suspects are willing to give up themselves, they have the numbers, and they also have the numbers for all the regions of the Homicide Department and also senior officers, and they can do it. Let us be serious and stop the noise. This is serious matters, and it is for the safety and the security of our nation that we are playing with, and we should do what is required to be done in order to uphold the law and the rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. All the best. Thank you very much.